becomes very unfashionable for an institution to have ties with an Israeli institution, or for students to even fathom the idea of having ties with an Israeli institution. So that's becoming very unfashionable on our campuses. And at the same time, whilst it is led by students, it's also becoming very unfashionable for academics to want to collaborate with Israeli academics or Israeli institutions. So there's a sort of sensitivity that's growing around it, a sensitivity around who you're collaborating with, and is this in line with the principles of social justice? And this is something that's really coming out of the academic boycott, and largely due to what happened at UJ, the first campus to cut ties about 2 years ago. So it's that sort of discourse that's growing. Also, in terms of campaigns on our campuses resulting out of the academic boycott, but not necessarily confined to academic boycott, so cultural boycotts. When Brand Israel so following what happened at UJ, Brand Israel sent a delegation of young Israeli students and so on to our campuses to sort of convince us that Israel is great, and essentially, in a nutshell. And this was not taken kindly to at most of our universities. There were protests at every university that they tried to go to. Other universities explicitly rejected them even entering their campuses. So that was a complete failure. And it's that sort of cultural boycott that's also having an effect on our campuses. And then the other big one is Israeli Apartheid Week. It's growing. It's growing on our campuses, and again, the mass movement is going to lend a lot of support to Israeli Apartheid Week. We have a lot of people involved, a lot of different organizations involved, and really broadening what IAW is on our campuses. A few years ago, like let's say 2-3 years ago, it wasn't such a big thing. There were a number of events on campuses, but not widely attended, that kind of thing. This year, and probably the coming year too, it's going really big. We're having collaborations across campuses, lots of students attending things. So yeah, again, students are really at the forefront of this and pushing their own academics in institutions to cut ties and so on. So where to from here? I think it's about, like I said, the snowball effect. It's about carrying on what's been happening and taking it to other campuses, such that everyone knows about it on all campuses. We don't have a lot of universities in South Africa. There's about 15 maximum, and I could even be exaggerating there. So we take it to every campus, and you create a sort of network of solidarity among students, and then academics also. There are a lot of academics that join us in a lot of our campaigns. So it's not, I'm not going to say it's very difficult to do that. I think in the next few years you are going to see that happening, a wide support network, solidarity network across South African campuses. That's the first one, and then I've talked about sensitivity around academic collaboration. And yeah, just broadening the debate on our campuses. So the concrete steps that have been taken, the boycotts at universities, are really lending that support to broadening the debate on our campuses. People want to talk, people want to discuss, people want to know how they can get involved. And yeah, I guess we are going to see what happens and create that mass movement of solidarity that is very much needed.
Can you hear me there? Is this on?
No.
Is it on? No. Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. Maybe I can use that. Okay, maybe I can use this. Okay, it might be losing battery. So thanks everybody for being here, and yeah, thanks for having us as well on this panel. Again, my name is Yafa, and I'm an organizer with Students Against Israeli Apartheid in Canada. But I am Palestinian, so I only moved to Canada not that many years ago. So I was involved in the student movement in Palestine before I moved into Canada, and then now, obviously, I am involved in the student organizing and solidarity activism, Palestine solidarity activism in Canada. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about that aspect. I did go to a number of different universities. But I do want to say one thing first. When we talk about student activism and student and Palestine solidarity activism, outside of Palestine, internationally, I think it's very important for us to first remember that Palestinian students inside Palestine have always been in the forefront of the struggle, as well as women, etc. So they were very vital and are still very vital to our struggle and our movement, and they always have been, especially in the 80s and continuing to today. So this is something to keep in mind. And as a Palestinian student also coming to do Palestine solidarity work outside of my home, I did face quite a few challenges, or looked at things a little bit differently, because the challenges that we had to face or have to face in Palestine as student organizers are completely on a different level than the challenges that we face as Palestine solidarity activists outside of Palestine, or especially Canada, now being one of the worst countries in terms of its unwavering support of Israel. So again, Palestine solidarity activism on Canadian campuses, I can only speak, is not a new thing, obviously, but what's new about it is that it kind of shifted after the 2005 call for boycott, divestments and sanctions that came from Palestinian civil society in Palestine. And how it shifted is that, again, the term apartheid became more utilized, and the work that we do, because now we echo the call for boycott, divestment and sanctions, became more campaign-oriented, action-oriented, as opposed to just having panels and talking about our struggle and what happens in Palestine without offering concrete campaigns or ways to get involved from outside to do something about it. Because always people say, oh, this is too bad, this is terrible, what can we do about it? And now that we have BDS as students and as students activists, it has been an amazing tool for us to offer this next necessary step in order to utilize our efforts internationally. So I also recognize this role, organizing outside of Palestine. That it's a little bit of a different role, but it's also very important for Palestinians who are outside of Palestine to be leading this activism and these kinds of campaigns as well. So as BDS activism kind of intensifies on campuses, same did as MJ and others have spoken about, the backlash and the silencing efforts from administrations on Canadian universities. I can only speak, well, I will be speaking specifically about Carleton University in Ottawa, the university where I did my grad school. So there are many different levels, and the one thing that Carleton did, Students Against Israeli Apartheid did back in 2009, is we launched a divestment campaign, and Canada's first divestment campaign. So basically, just in brief description, what this divestment campaign means, divestment itself as word is kind of the opposite of investment, but not really. So basically it's asking you to pull your investments from certain companies that do business with Israel, etc., and then you can maybe invest them in different alternative companies, but maybe we can get into that on Saturday. So basically what we called for as student activists, we carried a research project in our university, in specific in regards to the pension fund of the university. So each university has a big list of companies that make up the pension fund. So we got also, with the support of faculty, to get a list of those companies. We did research and we picked kind of 4 main companies at the time that were involved in, they're not Israeli companies, they're British and American companies who produce weapons. And these weapons are used by Israel, have been used in the last Gaza attack and the very current one. So basically we picked these main companies, and I'm speaking specifically about weapon companies and also non-weapon companies: Northrop Grumman, Tesco Supermarkets, BAE Systems, Motorola, and L3 Communications. And we created this report that was based on a lot of research. A lot of people were involved in this report, mainly students, but also faculty members and some academics and community members. And we basically demanded from the university, after we did the research and proved how these companies violate international law and human rights, demanded the university that they immediately take the stocks, they immediately divest. It's more specific, we demanded the Board of Governors of the university via the Pension Fund Committee to immediately divest from these companies. And second, to refrain from investing in similar companies. And third, to adopt a socially responsible investment policy for their pension plans so this doesn't happen in the future. So this is in a nutshell our divestment campaign. And what have been the backlashes of this divestment campaign? And again, it's been really hard to kind of, also being Palestinian activist, and it took me a while actually to learn what kind of backlashes we get, because for me in the beginning it was I didn't feel that I needed to justify why this is a human right violation, or why is being involved as an academic institution that's supposed to foster academia and safety and goodness and ethics and good research, why is it so challenging to justify why it's wrong for an academic institution to be invested in weapon company or in weapon companies? Why is that wrong? Having to justify that to academics that teach there, faculty members who we're supposed to feel safe around in academic institutions. But what we don't think about is that Palestinian students inside Palestine don't feel safe in their academic institutions, not because they don't have the right to speak on certain topics and issues of violations of human rights, but because Israel denies them their basic right of being involved in academic institutions and in student movements, etc. So I found that kind of really hard to work with, but now that I'm learning more, it's becoming more challenging, not easier. So yes, we did face a lot of backlash. The university in the beginning completely ignored the report. We launched the report in January of 2009. They completely ignored it. And then we got to a point where we didn't give them a choice to ignore it. So we forced them to not ignore it. And the way we did that was, first of all, it's a lot of work. Launching something like this around BDS is a lot of work. So you first have to do the research, but then you have to really do the legwork, and that's the harder part is really building public solidarity amongst the student body, the faculty, labor unions on campus, as well as staff. Money and influence and power, and usually, mostly, are not progressive and don't have progressive politics. And those very people who now try to shut us down, I wouldn't be surprised if we do a little bit of research. During South African apartheid on campuses, they played the very same role. So, but they don't dare to say it now. But we know who they are, and I think we should keep that on record. So this is basically what has been happening. One just last thing I would like to mention in terms of the latest university attempt to silence us, not just in regards to our divestment campaign, but as SAIA, as Students Against Israeli Apartheid, again, trying to ban the word apartheid, canceling our room bookings, that's all fine. But recently, our university, Carleton University, last year, they started this commission. It was called something really strange, like the Interracial, Interreligious, Intercultural Commission. And basically, we didn't know what was the point of this commission, but we later find out, and people who sat on the commission were handpicked. You couldn't actually ask to sit on the commission. They were handpicked. And the findings of this commission, they came out with a report very recently. And this report basically is very poorly, the methodology of the report is insulting to academic integrity to start with. It's an 11-page, really poorly written report. But basically, what they came up with over this year, a bunch of academics and representatives from students, is this really poorly written academic report that basically it intends to explicitly and implicitly silence any criticism of Israel on campus, which means I could be penalized for even saying that Israel violates human rights and international law, full stop. I would be called anti-Semitic. And they use Jewish students on campus and their experiences without even actually researching the experiences of all Jewish students. So they treated all of them as monolithic and having the same experience and feeling and etc. And they said that they feel unsafe on campus because of the pro-Palestine trolls who are us. So, yeah, so they come up with this report basically saying, oh, they feel unsafe, we have to make them feel safe. So how do we make them feel safe is to criminalize anybody who criticizes the state of Israel. It doesn't make any sense. And we just recently, so Faculty for Palestine actually launched an open letter basically condemning this and asking and demanding the university to withdraw this report and to withdraw it. And actually 8 former commissioners who were on the commission withdrew or tried to withdraw from the commission and signed this open letter, and over 800 signatures on this letter were gathered in very few days from students from Carleton across Canada and internationally, as well as faculty members and academics, condemning this report and condemning the methodology of it, but also the implications, the very dangerous implications of this report on us students, activists, and Palestinians also. And many of the organizers that we have are Palestinians, people of color, women, students who don't have status. They are on student visas. So in many cases, our status in Canada has been threatened. They say, do you want this scholarship to stay? If you want this scholarship to stay and remain, you gotta shut up. You can't do this anymore. So that happens, and this is just one way of doing it. So I'm just gonna wrap up now. And I'm just going to end it by saying that we will continue to build our campaigns on campus and in the community. We're not going to stop. If they want us to stop, we're not going to stop. The only way we will stop is actually when Israel respects international law, when justice is there, etc., etc., and when the apartheid policies are over, when the refugees are granted the right of return, and that might be a long process. So until then, we will not be silenced. We will not stop, and we will not be silenced.
Thank you, Yafa, for ending on a beautiful note. Just before I start to take a few of your questions, I wanted to say there's another panel on the academic boycott that will happen on Saturday from 10 to 12. But we're doing that one as an open discussion so we could sit and strategize around how to build the academic boycott campaigns in the various locations, especially here on this continent, because we still don't have very big academic boycott campaigns here. So you will have seen a paper like this go around. I see a lot of Palestinians nodding their heads, which means I expect you to be helping us to distribute it. I'll talk to you later, Aya. Please do take it, and it's from 10 to 12, and I hope to see many of you there for an open strategy discussion. I'll take questions from the floor. We'll take 3 questions at a time. If you can please stand up, identify your name, and if you're with any organization, and let us know your question. I know there's a tendency in these kinds of forums for people to want to make comments. Feel free to, but please keep them to a time limit. I will give everyone the exact same time, but I'll start going like this if you go over. And I'm a pretty loud Palestinian woman, so don't let me talk over you, and please wrap it up if I do this. So I'll take the first set of 3 questions. But now that I said that, don't be scared to ask. Please ask. All right, I have 1 hand. 2, and I'll try for gender parity, by the way. 3 men have put up their hands, so 3. All right, go ahead.
My name is Husseini. I'm from South Africa.
You have to take a microphone.
I think everyone can hear.
No,
My name is Husseini. Can I have the... My name is Husseini. I am a lecturer at Al Mustafa University in South Africa. Just my question was that is there any statistic of the database of the universities which already have cut their relationship with the Apartheid government or universities. And if it's not there, I think we have to start having such a database, and also how we can appreciate those universities who are taking the initiative and do the job. Like, for example, in the case of the sister mentioning about UJ University, Professor Farid Isaac and his colleagues and the people in the university who has done a great job of starting this and having this blow at the face of universities of occupied regime. If, I don't know, by BDS or any other body, we can have a letter of appreciation to the University of Johannesburg and to any other institution who is going to take this initiative, I think it's going to be very helpful. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you. Next was a hand in this area. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. My name is Gianluca. I am a journalist student here from Brazil. And before I go to my question, you said something about not having enough support or a very incipient support here in this continent. I assume you were speaking about Latin America?
Yes.
So,
on the academic boycott, not
okay.
on everything.
Yes, I know. But just before I go to my question, I would just like to make a very clear note that we Latin Americans have, and it has everything to do with the Palestinian cause. Do not refer to Latin America as a continent, and please do not refer to America as a country, because America is one continent, and it goes from Canada to Argentina. And I think it has everything to do with the Palestinian cause. And my question is, what we do see in many situations is that universities, they are all attended by some sort of intellectual elite in any country. It doesn't matter where you go. How do you see, or if at all, what do you see the effects outside the university community of your activities? Do you understand it? If you have at all seen any implications, any consequences, positive outcomes of your actions inside universities in the outside community?
Yes. Actually, I don't have a question. I'm just here to introduce myself and my colleague Yafa. Actually, we are a group of, I'm from Gaza. My name is Aya. Actually, my voice is
it's okay.
so yes, I can speak.
Use the microphone.
Okay. So my name is Aya. I am a BDS activist and one democratic state supporter. I am from Gaza. I came along with other four youth of my age, around my age, and also we have five activists, young activists from the West Bank, and 5 activists also from inside Israel. So, I will talk here. I will talk about the BDS in our workshop. So after this, I can distribute some of the leaflets for my work. I just wanted to highlight 2 points here about the South African work on the academic boycott. And actually, we work with this university. We are students in the SAIA, Palestinian Student Campaign for the Academic Boycott of Israel. So from Gaza, we worked. It was established after 2008, 2009, the massacre on Gaza, 2008, 2009. We established it with just 4 students, along with our professor. Maybe some of you heard about him, Dr. Hadari, and then the number is increasing. So with this university, we work with them on this resolution, and I myself I translated it into Arabic, and I do remember when we heard that yes, now this university after Johannesburg University now they took them. So my point is here is that to highlight the importance of every of the workshop of the academic purpose. And the second thing, now I graduated from Al-Aqsa University, and now I teach in the Islamic University. When in 2008, 2009, both Islamic and Al-Aqsa University, they were targeted, and most of the campuses were completely destroyed. So now, when I asked for a leave in order to come here, the dean asked me that, okay, I want to give you a video in order to show show it to the public after what happened to the Islamic University. Because some people are saying that, okay, but don't mix politics with academia, don't mix politics with culture. But actually, I came here directly after the latest attack, so I couldn't see him in order to take this video. My point is that we are living and we don't know what will happen. Before I came here, I didn't know that I will be able, me and my colleagues, will be able to come. So yes, I finished. I finished.
So Aya will be there on Saturday, and hopefully by then we might have the video as well. We'll see.
Yes.
Okay. There was another hand, I think, in the front. Yes. Can people who use the microphone pass it to the next person, please?
I'm Berit from the Palestine Committee of Norway. And in Norway, well, in my organization, the academic cultural boycott is a very important task. But in Norway, we have a separate organization working with this issue. SAIA. Do you know SAIA in Norway? No. And I have a question for you, the panel, because I think that the academic cultural boycott is the most important campaign compared with all others, because this the campaign represents high educated people, and you are a threat for the Israeli. And my question is, you said it yourself, that the academic cultural boycott is a silent boycott. But why is it so? Is it because of the media? Or is it something about you? Why don't you shout louder?
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the panel, and then we'll take one more set of questions. I think we'll have time. Who would like to go first in answering any of the questions?
Just quickly, I think I'll cover a couple of questions. The one about, does the academic boycott have an effect on the outside, as well as the statement just here. So it's very difficult, but one of the things is, I think all aspects of the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign are equally important. And one of the difficulties about the academic boycott is kind of what I described in my talk. It's just been that much more difficult to put on the table. That if there's any clarification needed by that in terms of in the university, that's actually, I think, the thing. And I agree with you. We do need to keep shouting louder. There's no doubt about that. And I do want to talk to you afterwards to get you on my list to see what's happening in Norway things. But just one thing, one of the things that we did, and it is difficult actually sometimes to actually make the connection across the campus and across the university to outside the university, partly because, yes, it is an elite institution. And that is true. But what BDS and the academic boycott has done is actually to break down a lot of that, right? So there is also an inverse thing that's going on. And it's not just an elite institution. A lot of people there are actually not in the same place. I'm going to speak from personally. I've been a contract faculty member for 8 years. I'm now leaving the institution. I'm on employment insurance, right? And I'm one of about 40% of faculty. A lot of students are struggling. So we have to sort of not just focus on that elite part, but we also have to address it, which I think is very important, because it's not about being educated. I think that there's many forms of education and many educated people in the BDS movement. It's one of the smartest movements in terms of being able to make connections, to make the links, to make the ties with PACBI, and I think we need to keep doing that. One of the things that we do in Faculty for Palestine to ensure that we're always trying, at least, and trying to build those connections, is we started by becoming a member, a committee of the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid. which represents all of the BDS sectors. And I think that was our only starting point. It connected us to BDS, it connected us to all the local movements. We work across all of those movements, including labor, including queer activism, including student activism, and I think that needs to be built. It's like building from whenever the local and national and central organizing that cuts across all of the BDS sectors is what's going to help make it more relevant coming out of the academic, because it is true, it is a bit of a task, there is a disconnect. Sorry.
A couple of points. I don't think anyone in the academic boycott would say it was the most important boycott. But it is an important boycott, and it is an area to which society is very sensitive. So that for example, there are wonderful boycott activities going along in Britain about Veolia, G4S, Agrico before it was forced into bankruptcy, and so on. But they don't generally get to be on the front page. And there's something about the academic and the cultural boycott to which society responds. So, since we are not going to bring down Israel by these boycotts, let me be clear, we are not going to bring Israel to its knees by an academic boycott, or indeed any of the others. What we are going to do is to make Israel a pariah state. What we are going to do is to make Israel a state with which the financial institutions of the world do not wish to do business, to make it into a state which our governments will not wish to do business with. And we are in the process of changing the minds of the civil society about what it is willing to put up with from its governments. Now, the academic and cultural boycotts are uniquely positioned to do that. And so there is a sensitivity there which I think is very important. Perhaps I'll leave it there.
I just wanted to respond to one of the first questions about a database of universities. On the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott Initiative, we try to put up anything that happens around the academic boycott up there. And certainly when the Johannesburg victory happened, we were in constant communication and we sent the letters of support and we were there hand in hand with everyone, shoulder to shoulder with everyone who was participating. But definitely, if you go to the PACBI website, it has the listing of all the cultural boycott initiatives and letters, as well as the academic.
And actually, some of us hear about this in other places. That's how we know what's going on. Like, we hear from them first, and then we contact other people. And sometimes people make it directly. I just wanted to add to the whole question about university being elite and so on. I agree, so I don't want to repeat what you're saying. But I don't think, and I want to add that I don't think a project of this sort, academic boycott in general, I don't think, by the way, that it is the most important. I don't think it's the most important. I think they're all the same, and I don't want to rank what's more important or less important and so on. It depends which location you're at. For each context, there is context-specific ways of dealing with things. So it sometimes shifts. Sometimes sometimes you're a teacher, but on another part you may be kind of talking about divestment from pension funds or something. So at that point you become a union member. So I don't want to I don't want to put it in boxes. But in the work that we're doing, we are part of a community. Some of us happen to be at the university during the day teaching. In the afternoon, we will be to other events in the community happening elsewhere and organizing around other kinds of. So I kind of think, especially when you talk about community colleges and public universities and so on, that's one thing. But the other thing I think, didn't get your name. I'm sorry. Danuka. I think the question of it is the idea of thinking about the university as an elite, as opposed to movements outside of the university that maybe not being elite and so on. And I think it may have. I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but I'm going to take advantage of what you said to just make a point about the whole question of how sometimes intellectual thought is thought of, like people who are in the business of producing knowledge, and I'm not meaning business in a neoliberal way, are seen as sometimes that they're the ones who own knowledge, as opposed to people who are outside of the formal knowledge production. I mean, we're in Brazil, we're in Paulo Freire's lands. So I think the kind of work that we do, all of us, falls within that there is all sorts of ways for people to acquire knowledge, learn, teach, produce, reproduce, contest, construct new knowledges, and so on. And that comes from all sorts of places, and it's not about formal education per se. And if we're actually only talking about formal education, we would be missing the boat, because we are talking about we're part of a political movement to change. Right. And so what we do outside of Palestine, I think, Yafa really made like the whole question of what's happening in Palestine, what's happening outside of Palestine. Our success and our inspiration has a lot to do with what happens in Palestine. We respond and we express our solidarity with the people who are struggling on the ground. We are struggling, and I think that it's important what we are doing. But at the end of the day, if you have a PhD, you will never starve. I mean, we always will find something to do. So I think it's not the most important thing to happen to us, right? Okay. So I think, it's relative. Some people think it's really, like, we'll eat, we'll find something to eat, right? So I think it is the liberation movement that is fighting on the ground that basically really inspires and encourages the people who are outside expressing support, even those of us who kind of go back and forth and so on. That's how it works. So it's really, we're part of like an international community that works in different things, and we complement and we complete each other.
I'll be short. I want to respond to the question on actions inside the university and how they affect the outside. Panelists have been talking about the elitism of universities. And I think it's not so much elitism in a knowledge production sense, although it is that. That's not what I want to talk to. What I want to talk about is more that universities are supposed to reflect a better version of society, in my opinion at least. I think because of the types of debates and discourses and knowledge productions that happen on university campuses, there's supposed to be a way of finding a better model of society within institutions. And I think it's because of that the academic boycott is important. So whilst everyone else can be fine with the injustices that are happening in the world, universities have to take a stance and say no. And I think that's where it comes from. That's why universities and academic boycott is important in sort of directing public discourse outside of the university. And then in terms of academic boycotts being silent, I don't think they are. I think they're symbolic, not silent. And I think when an individual academic decides not to have any ties with an Israeli institution, I think, yes, that's an individual silent thing, but I think it has a ripple effect through any institution. And yeah, that symbolic value is very important.
We'll do the next round, and we have Mick, and back there, and all the way at the back here. Mick.
Thank you. Can I just ask the panel a very simple question? There's been some discussion on elitism, but I just want to ask, would they agree that it's really, really important in order to be effective with the boycott, that we pull down the walls and the barriers that kind of unconsciously arise? I think the best way to pay tribute to people one really esteems is to be critical. And I think about the example of the head of the Israeli Medical Association, who became head of the World Medical Association. And some brilliant doctors did some excellent work and collected, I think, 700 signatures against his moving into that position. And afterwards, when I spoke to some of the people involved in it, I said, "You're absolutely crazy. Why the devil didn't you ask all the Palestinian activists around the world? We've all got a doctor. We all have a doctor, and I have 6 in my local practice. And if doctors had thought about not just speaking to other bloody doctors, but had thought about everybody who's got a doctor, the 700 could have been a multiple of that. Very, very easily indeed. And I think the sort of default arrangement of doctors speaking unto doctors has to end. And I think it has to end even more radically. A few years ago, went onto Glasgow University campus with a wallpaper table, and we set up a petition to get Mordechai Vanunu nominated as rector of Glasgow University. Winnie Mandela had been elected rector decades earlier, and the whole idea was to point to Israeli cruelty, the Palestinian prisoners as well, and I promised Vanunu he wouldn't win, but he actually did win. Nobody on campus asked, who the devil invited you onto this campus? In months of campaigning, and also we ran John Pilger as rector at Edinburgh University, we got 1,400 votes there. Nobody once said, you're not a member of this campus community. It was as simple as falling off a log to go onto the campus. There were no town and gown issues, if you like. So I would like to ask the panel, do they think that we need to break down the barriers that exist between town and gown? They don't exist as much as you think, between doctors and non-doctors, and say we are part of a campaign looking for the best way to punish Israel, and that means that we have to collaborate without distinction.
I wanted to quickly share two. I'm Soraya Jawadeen. I'm a South African labour activist. I wanted to share two quick experiences that took place at universities in our country and why the issue of an academic and cultural boycott is so important for oppressed people when they want to isolate the oppressor. The one was in the 80s, at the height of quite organized resistance internally and externally by people and our liberation movement externally against the apartheid government. And we had to make a decision that we wanted the South African apartheid state isolated. And an Irish academic, political scientist, Conor Cruz O'Brien, decided to come to the University of Cape Town and give a lecture. The students had approached the Vice Chancellor and said, the African National Congress has asked that the apartheid state be isolated, and we don't want Conor Cruz O'Brien to speak on this campus. And the academics and the Vice Chancellor said, that's nonsense. Intellectual work is neutral. It's got nothing to do with the anti-apartheid struggle. So Conor Cruz O'Brien is going to speak because it's a violation of what the universities represent if we send him back home. The students and workers organized and physically smashed the meeting down. 3 students got expelled. My brother was one of them. He was a SANSCO national organizer, and he was expelled, much to my parents' horror. Now that incident has been written about and has been discussed in academia of both South Africa and internationally, and was a very big thing. So it made newspaper headlines about the hooligans in South Africa that had no respect for an Irish professor. But it allowed space to say, for the ANC to say, when we've asked for an academic boycott, he had no business going to that university in the first place. The second example was post-1994, when the Secretary of State of the United States, Colin Powell, was going to visit South Africa, and he decided he was going to give a lecture at the University of Witwatersrand, where Tasneem and Tokelo come from. And students and workers that come from the union that I am representing blocked the gates, and Colin Powell was not represented by, his security wasn't organized by our country, it was organized by the United States military and intelligence. And we blocked, and he couldn't enter the campus. And his lecture was delayed by more than an hour. Of course, the workers and students were beaten up by the security, but he didn't get to make the lecture without that incident. And it allowed space, so everyone condemned the hooliganism of the workers from our union and the students, but it allowed us space to say that he represents agents of imperialism and oppression. So I'm just sharing those 2 examples. I'm not concluding on anything, because I don't think we must be too negative about the irrelevance of an academic boycott. It creates space to explain why in any society the dominant ideas in any institution are the dominant ideas of that society. So that's what academia would represent in an oppressive society. Thanks.
With all respect to the panelists, Jonathan, I'm not sure if the BDS campaign in general and the academic boycott in particular serves to make Israel into a pariah state. Israel does that by itself. The BDS campaign and the academic boycott may expose Israel's pariah status, but it doesn't make this pariah. It doesn't make Israel into a pariah state. The other thing is that I think that the academic boycott of Israel, the one that has been called by Palestinians, unlike the boycott against apartheid South Africa, which was called by the ANC, is a very light boycott. I mean, remember the ANC's boycott was also banning individuals from coming to South Africa. You had to be vetted in order to come to South Africa. And on that note, I just want to share a story from South Africa. You know, the funny thing, Rafeef, is that we have so many victories coming out. I mean, not only in South Africa, but across the world. It's difficult to keep track. But 4 months ago, at the South African Sociological Association, the most prestigious sociological gathering in South Africa, there was a panel that had an Israeli academic from Ariel, the settlement.
Settlement, right.
And he was sharing the stage with South African academics, and one of the South African academics asked him to distance himself from the occupation before the South African academic can partake in the panel. The Israeli academic refused to do so. The South African academic withdrew himself from the panel, so did the rest of the panelists, and the entire hall, the entire venue left in protest against this Israeli academic being there.
Hello, I guess this is the last question for tonight, right? My name is Anthony. I work at the American University of Beirut, and I'm here with queer visits for anti-pinkwashing organizing. So I have a specific question about something that came up even today in our own meetings, and it has to do with American organizing against for BDS, against Israeli, so on. And I can see how that necessitates turning a critical inward eye on settler colonialism in the United States of America. And my question, I guess, is how do you then negotiate the amount of energy, the priority, the importance of exploring this critical eye on settler colonialism and the immediate urgency of solidarity with the Palestinian cause?
Thank you all for the great questions. I just want to make a few announcements and then give it back to the entire panel to just do final remarks. How many people know where the demonstration is at 5? How many? Okay. How many people are going to the demonstration at 5? All right. So, it's at 5 o'clock, and we really need to represent. Bring t-shirts, flags, banners. I know the South African delegation will be marching close from here, and the Palestinian delegation will be joining them. I can't actually pronounce where the march is starting from, but it's at 5, and it's in your program.
It's in the program.
We don't know what it is. You can't say it.
The public market.
Public market.
Public market. Oh. 5 o'clock, public market. Please come out. Please bring your voices. We need to be loud to let everyone know that we're actually here. Again, I'll remind you that there is an academic boycott discussion that will happen on Saturday, so please do come. And tomorrow there's also a panel on combating brand Israel's sports boycott in comparison to South Africa's apartheid, and that's happening from 10 to 12. So please do check that out in your program and come out for that one as well. And see you at the demonstration. That's the note I will end on, and I'll give it to the panel.
I'm gonna give this to Rabab after, but I do want to comment on that question really quickly in regards to how to balance, speaking about colonialism when we organize in America and in Canada. I'm speaking about Canada in specific. Yeah, and I think it's a very important question. And as a Palestinian who moved to organize as a Palestine solidarity activist in another country that is a colonial country, except the difference between Canada, where I'm organizing right now, and Palestine is that the colonial project in Canada has been extremely successful. it has been extremely successful to the point where you can live your whole life in Canada not knowing anything about the indigenous people there.
Right.
So I feel it would be very hypocritical for us as Palestine solidarity activists who call Israel an apartheid state, because it is, and work on boycott, divestment and sanctions until this apartheid state is not an apartheid state anymore. It would be very hypocritical of us to do that on colonized land without standing in solidarity, and actual meaningful solidarity, not just acknowledging that we're standing on colonized land, but actually being completely in solidarity with the indigenous population there. It's like, imagine someone from another country organizing in Palestine about Peru, let's say, without ever be standing in solidarity with the Palestinians in Palestine and doing that in Palestine. So for us Palestinians and Palestinian activists, the aspect of solidarity, not just with indigenous people, but with other oppressed people, is very vital and important to our work.
50 people.
Yeah, I actually want to speak about the line issue, the hooligans. Okay, because I think first the hooligans. I think it's very similar to the UC Irvine. It's exactly what happened to your brother. So I think there is also a lot of ways for us to draw connections and think about that and inspire each other. I think that and I think we a lot of the times, I don't want to say we, but I think there are some academics who are very concerned about being called uncivilized. This is kind of like, this is not the thing becoming. This is not civil behavior. This is not. When you're in a revolutionary mode, when you're really trying to change the world, you're not supposed to be in civilized mode. I mean, that's very problematic. We, people who are leading revolutions do not take showers sometimes. I'm not saying everybody should take a shower if they're not leading revolutions, because sometimes there is also that other effect that happens, which is problematic. But that's another discussion. So I think that, that we need to kind of be thinking about these things, these traps that get set up for us, and sometimes we incorporate them because we want to seem that we are like approachable, we're reasonable, and so on and so forth. Which leads me to the second point about the whole question of kind of like light boycott. And I have two things. It has to do, I think, with the specificity of Palestine. It has to do with the fact that historically the Zionist movement has succeeded in lumping the tragedy of the Holocaust with the foundation of Israel. And I kind of like, I'll say it now, I keep saying that it's like, look, Israel was not set up by the survivors of the Holocaust. Israel was set up by Zionist Eastern European Jews that used the survivors of the Holocaust, because European countries closed the doors. United States closed the door, so use them as fodder. And actually, there have been protests by survivors of the Holocaust inside Israel because they weren't getting benefits, they weren't being cared for, they were homeless, and so on and so forth. So I think we really need to kind of like, I used to always quote Edward Said when he used to say, we are the victims of the victims, and I stopped doing that because we're not the victims of the victims. I mean, yes, Palestinian people have been victimized, and the Jewish European people have been victimized, but it's not that relationship, it's not direct, and it's not, like that. It's not. And I think it's really important for us to know the history. And I think when we don't know it, we kind of like commit these mistakes a lot. But the question of light, I think that we had the problem when we had actually a dilemma when we went at the delegation June 2011, because we had very short time, and some people were saying we should go through Tel Aviv airport. And we had a big discussion. We agreed that we're not going to go through Tel Aviv. We're going to go through the same routes that Palestinians go through. If you are coming to express solidarity with the Palestinian people, you can't be going through the routes that their colonizers go through. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And it's something that will last for a long time. But I understand where the whole discussion comes in, and maybe on Saturday we can talk more about like the boycott, divestment, and sanction. In terms of just the priorities, I agree with what you said, Yafa, and I don't think it is about either or. It's not about, it's a framework. It's really having a very critical framework against colonialism. And I always think about it like, if I'm not going to speak about settler colonialism in the Americas, by the way, when I talk about, not talking about just North America, because there is settler colonialism in these areas too, right? I mean, in Brazil and everywhere else, we have that. A lot of indigenous populations have been completely wiped out, and some are still there, still struggling. I always think about what will happen if somebody goes to Palestine and talks about Israel being a nation of immigrants. How would Palestinians feel? I mean, just flip it around and think about that, and you see how problematic it is in all settler colonies. And I think it's a framework. It's not, and it gets actually reproduced worse in American university institutions across the board because they become satellite colonies, right?
Okay, just quickly, yeah, in terms of your question, my answer is yes, we do need to break down those barriers. One of the things that we're doing in Faculty for Palestine is we are explicitly an activist organizing. There are very, very few on campus in terms of faculty activism, and it gets into the point Rabab said about not being civilized, etc. To be an activist is to go there, and that's what we actually want to do. We want to have an activist faculty campus, and in whatever small way that we can push that, that is actually what we're doing, and I think that's one thing. The other thing is in terms of breaking down those barriers, the campus, non-campus doctors, not just speaking to doctors, I like that phrase, by the way, Israel actually gives us these opportunities. There's an organization that I just want to quickly mention, or a new group called New Yorkers Against Cornell Technion Partnership, which are basically the Technion gave money to New York City, to build a humongous campus and do all this science building, etc. Total collaboration project. And a number of people from New York, from all different, not just academics, from all different places, including workers on campus, but also residents in the area, are building this amazing campaign. And it's very new, but it's called NYACT, N-Y-A-C-T, and it's something to watch out for. So we need to just grasp these opportunities. And these are the spaces, whether they start on campus or outside of campus, so that we need to continually build. And just, I'm just going to say on the question of settler colonialism, absolutely, I just agree with what was just said by Rabab and Yafa. But I also just want to say that in the Canadian context, BDS has in fact opened up a lot of anti-racist debate. Like if we think about BDS as an anti-racist and anti-colonial campaign, we are actually seeing white Canada and the way in which Canada's sort of white foundations and its colonial foundations are being exposed. There's been like a whole new literature on Canada's long history of supporting Israel. Sometimes those connections are made to racism, sometimes not, and we need to make those links clear to say, well, what does that say that Canada has this long-standing relationship? It means that Canada has long-standing racial and colonial foundations, and make the links that way. And that's actually one of the things that we do try to do. We've written on it, but we always need to do it better. It's not something you say once and then it goes away. You need to keep organizing, keep building that in, that message. And that is something that BDS has given to the world, is opening up that argument about racism and colonialism again.
I want to join in this general discussion, but first to respond to a remark by Mohammed, where I said that our job is to make Israel a pariah state, and he said no, Israel does that itself. Well, it gives us all the evidence, but it doesn't make it a pariah state unless we find the way of informing people effectively about what Israel is doing. So we have to make it into a pariah state. They have made it potentially a pariah state. I want to go into this question about this very light, which it is, a light boycott which has been called for by PACBI. Does this mean that PACBI is a sellout, asking only for a lightweight academic boycott and cultural boycott compared with a much stronger one in South Africa? And the answer, I would say, is no. PACBI had its very good reasons for doing that, and they had to do with the extent of friendship and goodwill which Israel had compared with South Africa at the time when the boycott was announced. The Holocaust, even though the people in Israel, the Zionists, were not Holocaust survivors, the Holocaust is a very effective rhetorical gambit. We can't ignore that fact that many people who are not as informed as those in this room will find that as a reason not to wish to join in too rigorously anti-Israel activities. Israel, unlike South Africa, as I've said, has friends all around the world. So the decision as to how to call this boycott was a political one, and we need to be political too. we need to have our own political analysis. We need to understand it in terms of colonialism. We have to have our critique of Zionism, etc. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to shove that into everybody's faces all the time. We need to understand what we're doing and how we're campaigning, but we have to look at, in terms of what we do, in terms of the people we're trying to influence. The people we're trying to influence do not have our analysis at this moment. We need to give them things which they will not reject. We need to accept, in general, the guidelines which PACBI has given us, which are quite sensible, and then vary them, either personally or in terms of local circumstances. For example, it only asks us to boycott Israeli institutions. That's no reason why individuals of us cannot boycott individual. I personally am not going to have any dealings with that Israeli academic in my field, which goes beyond the guidelines. In other cases, we may wish to go not so far as the guidelines. For example, when we were boycotting Habima in the Israel National Theatre, which came to England this year, the suggestion from PACBI was that we should boycott the whole globe-to-globe festival involving 37 different performances by national theatres, and we said no, because we will not get a single theatrical person in Britain to support them. So we varied the advice from PACBI and got a very successful campaign with high-level theatrical people from Emma Thompson up and down to support the boycott, which we actually advocated for, that one company only. So we have to be political in what we do, political in terms of what we think the people that we are trying to get to in this particular campaign will stand at the moment.
I'll be short so that we can go to the march. Just quickly, historically, South Africa during the apartheid times called for boycott of the South African state, and in doing this, the first, prior to even a formal boycott request coming out of the African National Congress, the people who were at the front of leading a boycott against apartheid South African state were students and academics in universities. And I think this is as far as the role that they play goes, is that it's again, I'm going to repeat it again, it's in shaping that public discourse. And those academics and students who started to isolate the apartheid South African state did it in such a way that they sensitized the rest of the public around what South Africa was doing back then. In terms of collaboration though, I think absolutely, there's no doubt that we should all be collaborating. What I like about South Africa is that at the moment, in terms of solidarity and BDS, is that you have trade unions, you have students, you have ordinary citizens, and political parties, and all of these different groups who come together under one banner, very often with the same message. And I think that's what's needed. You need everyone to come together, stand in solidarity with one united message.